Well, good morning. I'm Bernie Niemeyer, President and Publisher of Virginia Business Magazine, here to welcome you to our first annual CPA Roundtable, actually more formally known as the 2015 Economic Expectations Roundtable with insights from Virginia's CPAs, co-sponsored by the Virginia Society of Certified Public Accountants and Virginia Business Magazine. Introducing our panelists today, from my far left, we have Colette Wilson from Fairfax Station, Virginia, the chair of the Virginia Society of CPAs Board of Directors and a former partner with Cotton & Company. To her right is Ryan Losi, Executive Vice President of Pasek & Associates from Richmond, Virginia. To Ryan's right is Greg Lawson, a partner with Dixon Hughes Goodman in their Newport News office. And to his right is Charles Equi with Johnson Equi & Company. He's an owner and partner, and Johnson Equi is located in Roanoke, Virginia. Then to my right here, we have editors from our magazine, Robert Powell and Veronica Garibelli. I'm going to turn it over to editor Robert Powell to begin the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. We're going to be talking about the results of the survey that the CPA Society did with its members. Charlie, looking at the results for the past 2 years, why does the survey continue to show that many CPAs believe a full recovery is still several years away?
Well, that's, that's a neat question. That depends when it comes from my office. But it depends on what part of the state you're from, how that survey took on. But within my practice, I've had, handful of clients have had the best years they've ever had the last 3 years. And just astonishing years. But the majority of them are just, kind of barely getting over the hump. They're just moving along. And I think a lot of the practice, from my sector is seeing that. Where, I'm somewhat optimistic that things are improving right now. But I'm kind of seeing, it depends on what kind of industry you're talking about, but they're still having a hard time getting going. And we haven't had that breakthrough, that, innovation that is going to move the whole country yet. Right. And usually when it came out of these economic downturns, we saw something that moved us forward. But again, it depends on what kind of industry you're in and how it's moving along right now. But I think from my sector, anyways, that small, what I handle is small, closely held businesses. And when I say that, it could be anywhere from $50,000 gross to 30 million a year. Right. They're having, some of those businesses are still having difficult times staying in business. Right. And there's a lot of issues there with generations taking over and new technology that's taken over. But there's a lot of factors you can't wide pinpoint. But right. The overall economy, from a local to a national economy, has just in my opinion, it's kind of humping along. It just has not zoomed yet. Right. And I haven't seen that one person come out with that innovation to move our country forward yet.
Right, right. Anyone else?
I think from the 10,000 foot level, the respondents to the survey kind of being divided between half of them thinking it's positive, half of them think it's negative, is from the perspective that they look at it. I think some of those people are looking at the 17 trillion in national debt we have. If you add the off-balance sheet debt to that, it's another $70 trillion. If you look at the aggregate debt of all the states, it's another $2 trillion. And if you look at it from that perspective, you tend to be negative.
Right. And you might also add student debt there, even though it's not.
Yeah,
it fades into the business part of it.
That's part of the off-balance sheet debt. If you're a positive thinker, you look at recent trends. The stock markets continue to be resilient. We're getting some gains in the labor markets, and even the decline in gas prices. All are consumer-oriented things that make you look at the opportunities.
Right.
So this question's for Greg. Most respondents seem to be more optimistic about the outlook for Virginia's overall economy next year, but more pessimistic about the U.S. economy. What do you attribute to this difference?
I think that Virginia has enjoyed a strong economy for a number of years. It tends to not have some of the swings that the national economy has, partly due to the strong military presence we have in Virginia with the Department of Defense. We do tend to have a fairly diversified economy in manufacturing, technology. Of course, the ports are an important factor in Virginia economy. So I think those are items that make Virginians a little bit more optimistic as compared to the national surveys.
I would just like to add in there that in 2007 and 8, and then also leading into 2010, Virginia, and this was through the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, saw that there was a branding opportunity of branding Virginia as a business or a state for business, not just Virginia for lovers. So if you ever see the heart, Virginia for lovers, you also see that it's branded the best state in business, open for business. Those are a lot of taglines. Under the Kane administration, they focused on rebranding, and that wasn't just rebranding from a national standpoint. That's from an international standpoint. So something that was thought of in the 70s, and everyone around the world knows Virginia's for lovers. What they didn't realize is, hey, Virginia is probably one of the top states for supporting businesses. And so let's go ahead and leverage that. And then the other thing is in 2009, there was a survey done heading into the McDonald administration, and economic development had never been constituents' top concerns. It had always been protection, fire, police, teaching, education, things like that. Economic development was number 3, and so it had never been a top priority of spending dollars and growing. And so the General Assembly increased substantially the economic development budget of the VDP and went out there and promoted Virginia as the #1 place to do business in the world, to come to Virginia. Now you start seeing some of the other states, New York, Michigan, a couple years down the road, 2012, 2013, 2014. And so taking that investment early on and making a message and having a clear message and a unified across all agencies was a smart thing for Virginia to do. It helped us weather a storm that we didn't know was coming.
I agree with the two respondents previous. I think also that when CPAs or myself are doing the survey, you want to be more optimistic about your home state and where you are. Looking at the budget issues that the government had, as well as Virginia, the government shutting down, Virginia being able to stay open, I think made a huge difference in terms of perspective when you're comparing my home state, how well are we going to do compared to at the nation. I think that even though there's a pessimistic view about whether the economic recovery is going to come back, Virginians can kind of see that as trickling down to them as opposed to what's going on in our home state. I think that's what leads to their optimism.
Okay, Ryan, should the Affordable Care Act be reformed or repealed?
Well, if I were running for office, I'd be really stuck. It's 50-50 across the Commonwealth. Certain areas, it's a little bit more skewed. It's kind of hard to think about, from a business owner. I am a business owner, small business owner, so I understand the burdens that businesses have. A lot of compliance is, red tape is what you'll hear. A lot of paperwork and red tape and things, that require administrative resources are put upon us because of regulation. And so, for instance, why are we withholding tax agents that are unpaid when it's really not our responsibility? Well, these are things that add on to it. So the business community gets a lot of times forced to be the responsible agent for these plans, whether we like it or not. So, from a business standpoint, I don't like to see more administrative burden. It distracts us from our core businesses. But when you look at it from a global standpoint, we have an aging population. We're one of the few developed countries that doesn't have national policy regarding health care. I can see that argument right there. Personally, my opinion is that employers, businesses, shouldn't be responsible for the health care of its employees. It should be responsible for negotiating and paying them a fair compensation, and then they can choose. So that's my personal opinion as a business owner.
That 1,000-pound elephant sitting in this room right now. I've had 3 phone calls yesterday on what to do about it. And there's various opinions from the CPAs. It is very cumbersome for us. Any law that's passed, any tax law, the business community has to deal with it. But what readily happens is that the CPAs at the end have to deal with it. We're the one that has to finalize it on the tax return, collect the money, and submit it back. So, it always comes back on us no matter what law it is. Healthcare, you name what industry it is, it's going to come back on us. We pretty much have to enforce the law. So there's a theory. Go ahead and just implement it, because it's just causing so much problems right now for us it's a moving target. Every time they think we've got it, they change it or delay it. I don't know if there is a right answer for that, but it is going to be very costly. And whether my personal opinion matters or not, whether you want it or not, I think it's coming. And whether different parts of it will be changed, I think it will be. But from a CPA standpoint, just trying to handle these, it needs to be moved on, implemented, so we can tell them what to do instead of trying to guess all the time.
I think that addresses, business does not like uncertainty. And when you have uncertainty, things slow down from a business perspective. And, with delaying dates, changing laws, changing regulations, changing interpretations, uncertainty kills business opportunity and growth. And I think when you can take the uncertainty out of it, and you can give us rules that we're going to have to abide by, and there's some certainty that those are in fact going to stay in place, business can adapt to that.
I think as CPAs, the answer to the question for me is reform. I think, like Ryan said, it's gone so far. It's coming. It's here. Reform is needed. I think to just repeal it would just make things completely worse. But it does put the onus on the CPAs, and that is something that they should be looking to us for. We have to deal with the businesses, or we have to deal with the individuals, and we're the ones who are going to put forward what we feel needs to be right, what we feel needs to be consistent, and how to handle these issues. But I think repealing it would just cause more harm than it already has done thus far.
Okay, so Colette, on that note, what specific challenges are CPAs and their clients facing in terms of the ACA and the employer mandate next year?
For that, I would need to turn it over to someone else on the panel. My expertise is in the federal government area, helping federal agencies work, and I've not personally worked with businesses and clients.
Okay.
So,
anyone else?
someone else.
Just implement it. Does it apply to me? And if it doesn't, what am I supposed to do? If it does apply to me, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
What penalties are going to hit me? I have a whole booklet on it that's that thick, and I wish I could tell you everything about it, but I can't. When we approach something, we approach it with each client to see how it's going to fit. And just to figure whether you qualify or not, you got to figure what kind of full-time employees you got. Whether you're full-time, part-time, you got to do a calculation to figure how many employees you got. It is such a complex law getting to that point that you have to first approach the insurance company. Hope you got a good insurance department there that's helping you get through this part. Then you got to step in and say, yay or nay, this is what we need to do. You got to provide a certain percentage to the employees coverage, or you get fined. If they don't have coverage, you get fined. It's just so many complexities that we couldn't sit here and answer all that today. But it is, like I said, it's a 1,000-pound elephant sitting here right now. Do you want?
No, I think it's kind of been summed up. I mean, the issues are, from a business perspective, in my mind, are we covered under this legislation or not? Are there strategies where we can avoid coverage under this legislation? How do we educate our employees as to what opportunities the legislation prevents for them? How do we manage our entire employee benefit model around this regulation and still be able to pay a competitive wage to our employees and give a fair return to our shareholders?
And that's a very simplex answer to a very complex
I'm
problem.
a simple person.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the answer either, I'm telling you this, but it's a tough one to deal with right now.
Yeah,
in my practice too.
I think also, again, it's a moving target. Determining full-time employees is a tough, especially when you're in an hourly-based business. I think those businesses are the ones that really are going to have the most challenge Those have more than 50 full-time employees, and the majority of their employees are on an hourly basis. Those are the ones who are going to have the big challenges of keeping up with this. Those who have less than 50, probably not such a big issue. Those who have more than 50 and everyone's highly comped, probably not issues. But those who have significant amount of part-time and hourly workers and are over that 50, they're going to have a challenge. And what it does is it's a distraction on what their core business is.
Again, goes back into growth again.
Yeah.
Okay, Charlie, this is one question. It is not directly addressed in the survey, but it's something that we're all aware of. Virginia has been dropped in CNBC's top states for business from number 3 in 2012 to number 5 in 2013, and now is number 8 this year. And in other rankings, it also seems to be slipping compared to other states. It's still in the top 10, but it's slipping down. Do you have any idea why our perception of our business climate or our why the state is not ranked as high as it used to be?
Thinking from a sports if I go from number 3 to number 8, I'm still happy. But over the past years, we've had issues within the
Right.
political realm trying to solve the budgets and trying to meet the funding and things of that nature. I think that's had a big part to play in it. Anybody else want their take on it?
I think Ryan spoke to this a little bit
Mhm.
earlier. Some of the other states in our surrounding markets have discovered the advantage of being aggressive in attracting business
Right.
locations. I mean, South Carolina has been very aggressive in that area with large incentives and have been successful in getting some major manufacturing facilities to locate there that we're also looking at Virginia as a possibility. So I think that's one thing, just the field of competition has expanded. I think secondly, on a broader comment, Virginia, once known as, the genteel, collegial legislature that could get things done.
Right.
And, we enjoyed that benefit for decades. The last decade or two, it's become much more partisan.
Right.
And I think that has adversely impacted on how business and surrounding states see us from a competitive standpoint. So I think that's the second thing that I would comment on.
Although they have made some strides this year, a little bit.
Well,
We've got a budget in place, and that's helped some, so maybe we'll jump up to number 5.
That's true, but having, your governor and a few
Right.
years ago, high-ranking legislators
Right.
in the news, in court, has not
That's not
been helpful to
Right.
Virginia.
I would absolutely say competition is what causes it. When there's less competition, easier to rise to the top. It's easier to score touchdowns when you're the only one catching the ball. So that certainly played a key role in Virginia dropping down. One of the things I'd point out that I thought would have been a big win for Virginia is the transportation package that was passed. For 20 years, a lot of large footprint distributors and manufacturers, in particular foreign firms that were looking to make their either expand or make a large investment in the U.S. Or North America, had shied away from Virginia because they didn't have a great plan with regards to really their road system and their rail system, and didn't have really a plan of how to deal with all the increased volume of traffic. And so they shied away to Virginia. And I would have thought that would have been something that helped. Now we have at least a plan of how to fund the infrastructure issues that we're having, both in the Hampton Roads, Norfolk, Tidewater area, and also in the Northern Virginia area. So again, I thought that would have helped. I think it may help long term. You see companies like Amazon decide to put a distribution facility here. Maybe there's more of those to come. I think there should be continued marketing of our number one asset as a state, which is the port. That could be certainly something that really grows and changes, Virginia long-term. I'm glad to see it wasn't transitioned to private, because that's something that is going to help Virginia as well. It's one of the few profit centers of the state.
Not to jump the gun, maybe this is going to be a question later, but my thought was the perception of Virginia and its proximity to the D.C. area and its dependence on federal funding, federal spending. I think that could be seen as, with the federal government having so many problems, Virginia being so tied into federal spending with the military and the ports and all of the programs, that can be seen as Virginia's business not being as strong if it's dependent on these issues that are going on at the national level. And that could just be a perspective as opposed to just the straight numbers that you're talking about.
Greg, tax climate was identified as one of the top issues that needs to be addressed at next year's General Assembly session. So what are the specific tax issues that businesses are going to face next year?
Well, from a state legislature level, Virginia still enjoys a relatively low individual tax rate and a relatively low corporate tax rate. So those things are positive. Those tax rates have remained unchanged, I think, probably for a couple of decades. So I think that's positive. That brings some certainty. It's still a very friendly state from tax perspective for businesses to operate in and relocate to. There are some issues around the margins as it relates to the level of funding we're going to get for business incentives, tax credit programs, and some of those things that have to be reauthorized every year. So we watch those very closely.
I would just add in that certainly the VSCPA has done a great job of helping tax policy stay simple at most compared to other states. We try to conform as much as possible to make it simple from an individual's compliance standpoint as well as a corporate compliance standpoint. And then also having, for the most part, a fixed rate. There's a little bit of graduation on the individual side, graduated rates, but they're pretty much a fixed rate. So you can plan and you don't have to worry about there's a millionaire's tax, Prop 30 in California, or we're going to have a tax that goes up north of us in Maryland, and all of a sudden have a large migration of folks. So I think those are things that have voted well for Virginia. I think the VSCPA has been very active with the General Assembly sessions, explaining, reinforcing, and ensuring that stays pretty much solid.
From a practical standpoint, that they have to deal with is from the federal side, of course, and which we're looking at again this year. The last 2 years, we've had problems dealing with the tax law getting passed late. And so from the state standpoint, they have to adjust whatever the federal passes. And there again, it goes back to your planning and your growth to the state over all these questions. For instance, I have several businesses right now want to buy major equipment. I'm talking $500 million pieces of equipment. They won't do it because they don't know what the tax law is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so from a state standpoint, they have to know what the federal government's going to do so they can plan for our state. So that has a major effect too on the way people think in the state and trying to plan what the growth level is going to be. Because you buy one piece of equipment for $1 million, think who has to make it, ship it, get it there, install it. It's a lot of jobs. It's not being happening right now.
Like Ryan said, when we go to the General Assembly, it almost seems like no matter what the issue is related to tax, we're always talking about conformity, consistency, the burden on the taxpayer, the burden on the businesses, and just understanding what Virginia needs to do as compared to the federal government. Passing it late and not having conformity on so many different issues is just a burden in itself, no matter what the specific issue is. The mobile workforce is an issue with our employees within the state and other employees coming to our state in the DMV area, having to pay taxes when they're working outside the state. That can be a lot of burden. We've been working on that. So it's just conformity and consistency across every area. I think it's going to be a problem for the businesses.
Ryan, infrastructure was identified as the most pressing issue facing Virginia. And I wanted to get your opinion about what are the infrastructure issues that we're facing. Are we talking about roads? Are we talking about ports? What do you think is the are the critical infrastructure issues we have?
My take is, I've been following this for, I don't know, six to 8 years closely, is that it's our roads. Everyone's experienced or read the news headlines. We're experiencing record exports. There's some reasons policy-wise, weak dollar. Certainly, we've gotten behind the financing of exports through Exim Bank, higher guarantee levels, things like that that allow us to make deals with our trading partners. But we have a record number of exports. 2009, the Obama administration mentioned there was a mandate of doubling exports by 2014. It didn't happen. It grew about 30%, but it certainly hit record levels. To me, and I work with a lot of exporters, probably close to 100 exporters, because I work with export incentives. To me, that means traffic, and it means there's tangible goods moving from one jurisdiction to another. And if it's coming through the ports, that traffic's got to go one of two ways. It's either going to go through, or for the most part, rail or truck. It's not going to have, we don't have the river system that the Mississippi and the Delta folks have down in the Gulf that can take it all the way up. So if it can't fit on the rail, or it can't get there on time because of timing issues for the rail, or cost is not an issue, then it goes on trucks. And our roads were not built to handle the container volume that they're currently handling. I think they were meant to handle, about 30% less. And cars don't really beat up interstates and highways, trucks do. And so, that's been a big challenge. I think for 2 decades we haven't had really a transportation plan. We finally do. So we'll see where that goes. But if we're going to be the state on the East Coast that handles the majority of the traffic, because our port can handle the large ships that are being built, because we have a sand-based port that you can dig as deep as possible, and it doesn't cost a lot to dredge it versus limestone up to the north. Well, if you're going to do that and you're going to build that, well, then you got to have the infrastructure to get it to the rest of the population, 55%, within a day's drive. You can't just get it to the port. And on the other side is, if we've got exports that are growing at a significant level, you've got to get those exports out too. So the transportation plan, it's being funded now with sales tax dollars. I'm interested to see over the next couple of years, will it be put to work on capital spend.
Yeah, I think Ryan's right on point on that. And me, being from the Southeast, transportation, the expansion of the 64 corridor from Hampton up through Richmond is critical, as well as solving the tunnel issues getting from Hampton into Norfolk and Virginia Beach. Those are critical factors. And they're not only critical for our commercial enterprises and our ports, because they are very much interested and need adequate transportation. They're also critical to the military. Sequestration is the law of the land right now. We're going to have another BRAC. It will probably be in 2017. And I can tell you there was a concentration of DOD and military bases in Southeast. They're looking very closely at that issue. And if we can make some progress in solving the 64 corridor between Hampton and Richmond, get some shovels in the ground on that project, have a plan as it relates to the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, then that's going to be critical in any considerations from the BRAC perspective. We have some real opportunities. If we can overcome those burdens and show progress on those issues, Southeast Virginia and Virginia as a whole has a great opportunity to be a net gainer in the next round of BRAC. Norfolk Navy Yard, they have the capacity and the technology, including nuclear engineers, to house the entire Atlantic fleet at that facility. Naval Weapons Station, Yorktown, they have the infrastructure capacity to merge in the other 2 naval weapons stations. Those issues would be tremendous, save billions of dollars in the national defense budget. Increasingly, SEALs, special ops, are increasingly important element in our national defense and addressing critical problems, we have the facilities and the commands in place to consolidate those activities. So if we can get by the transportation issue and show some progress there, if we can deal with some of the encroachment issues we're having on military bases, we have a great opportunity to come out smelling like a rose in the next round of BRACs and have significant economic impact on Virginia.
Colette, the next question is for you. A majority of respondents think the Commonwealth has not done enough to lessen its dependence on spending. Is sequestration taking a toll on companies in the state?
I'm sorry, the last part?
Is sequestration taking a toll on companies in the state?
Absolutely, I think it has. In terms of this question, I think for the respondents to say Virginia hasn't lessened their dependence on federal spending, it's kind of hard to lessen your dependence on that spending when the spending doesn't stop. The federal government continuously spends. And with our proximity to the nation's capital, I just think it's obvious, and it's hard to lessen that dependence on there. With sequestrations, absolutely, that did hurt businesses when the government shut down. But from my experience in the federal world of helping the federal agencies, it was kind of ironic because in that time frame, there was not an effect on some of the public accounting firms that were helping federal agencies. They still needed federal contractors to do work. We knew that once things turned around, that we were going to be there, that they needed all of their accounting services to be done, their consulting services, their audit reports, all the rules and regulations that those agencies need to follow. That stuff still needed to happen. And so in terms of public accounting in the Northern Virginia area where there were a lot of federal contractors, it really didn't hamper a whole lot. But for the other corporate and industry businesses, I think absolutely there's an effect on there. I think it's just that proximity to the national government that is unavoidable. There's going to be that dependency, and anything that happens with them in the private sector is going to be to the detriment of Virginia businesses.
To that, actually Virginia did allocate, the General Assembly did allocate a couple $1 million specifically for helping Virginia-based defense contractors or government contractors commercialize and grow their commercial revenues. And actually a former colleague, employee of mine, actually led that program and is leading that program right now. And the goal was to help them take a lot of the, if they had some intellectual property and know-how that they could use that wasn't limited by contractual terms, and convert that into a dual-use commercial space. Let's go after commercial clients, whether it's across the U.S. or in other countries that we have favorable relationships with. So whether it's under the Foreign Military Sales Act, or again, Australia, Germany, France, UK. These are trading partners that a lot of times defense companies can work with both of those jurisdictions. So Virginia did allocate, they carved some funds out. I think it was a 2012 session, and they went out and tried to identify as many Virginia-based defense contractors and explained to them the program and brought them in and said, let's go ahead and try to expand some of your revenues. It's hard to do that change, I will say, because a lot of these defense contractors, 95% or more of their revenue is government related. And you'll see it in the audit report. It says, hey, you have a high concentration of your revenues derived from one or two clients. That's a risk in itself. So to migrate that all of a sudden to a 50-50 ratio or 60-40 ratio, it takes some time. It's tough. But certainly Virginia, put its money where its mouth was.
Most of the survey's respondents said partisanship at the federal and state level is preventing government from addressing urgent needs that have an impact on business. What critical issues do you think are not being resolved by gridlock? Charlie?
Again, I think we touched on this already. We mentioned that because there is so much disagreement that just getting the laws passed for the business to understand what they're supposed to do so they can move on, grow, make plans, go forward with that. You could say it's happening at the state level and it's happening at the federal level. We saw it happen last year, in both levels. kind of a touchy issue to, but
what about immigration reform? Is that something that you hear businesses concerned about?
it doesn't really affect me, you know. Back it up for a few questions, you know, I'm from southwestern Virginia, so the issues I'm hearing here and the growth is completely different than what we would see.
Right.
You know, again, we would have transportation issues.
Right.
81 comes right up here to 64, so, you know, we have the same bridges and roads need to be repaired. You know, there's school buildings, things that also falls into it. A lot of my clients do have, you know, immigrants come to work for them, but it's never been the issue that, you know, we address, you know, certain specifics that they have to have before they come on board. It might be more of an issue here dealing with, you know, border issues and things of that nature than it is for me. Problem's a little bit different, but going back to the state issue, you know, I think we all have seen or been involved in a situation where the fighting has caused delays or growth. You can see the direct results of growth not being done because there's a delay. And it's caused many headaches and many problems for us trying to, you know, do business in the state
I
or
think
have new clients come in the state.
Yeah, I think specifically on your question on immigration, where you see that adversely impacting business. I'm from the Southeast. We have a large seafood industry in the Southeast. A friend of mine owns a large crab picking operation, and just trying to get import workers for that seasonal crab business, he goes through hurdles and hurdles every year to do that. So if that can be part of an immigration policy and migrant work policy, you see how the same thing in the farming industry with immigrant workers, and that's important to Virginia business. I think on a broader scope, these issues such as immigration and Affordable Care Act are taking a lot of time in Congress, and it distracts them from dealing with other day-to-day activities.
Not running for office or anything, but there's a couple of things that I think that
You should.
have done at the national level would really change the game for this country. Immigration reform is one, corporate tax reform is another, energy policy is another. Dealing with international practice, I get to hear a lot of thoughts from other folks from other countries. We have strong property rights, you know, that are upheld and through our legal system. We have a lot of entrepreneurs here, a lot of thinkers. We have a really cool country. You know, people think the U.S. is hip. And, you know, you learn that when folks come here at the institutional level, higher education, they come here, they go back home, and boy, do they yearn for our movies and our sound. I mean, that's why those industries have 90% of the world market. You solve some of those, and you could really change the game because they want to put their money here. I'll give you an example. I have probably 30 Chinese national clients. There's so much uncertainty in China that once they do develop a significant amount of wealth, they want to get it out. They immediately want to get it out. And where does it want to come? They want to come to the U.S. and they want to buy. It doesn't matter if the property is making money or income. They just want to make sure that it stays available there. So they're buying real estate or franchises or buying wineries or buying just hard assets. So if we could change those things, immigration reform, corporate tax reform, I mean, we're not competitive. We are not competitive. We are the highest corporate effective tax rate in the world. And even if we have all these goodies, these credits and incentives that get the actual effective rate low, perception is what rules. When you look at the list and you look at the U.S. and then Japan and in all the other countries, there's been this huge migration of moving corporate tax rates down. That means more dollars for working capital, i.e. people and investment. So if you bring that down and become competitive, maybe bring it down to the mid-20s or even the low 20s. That's where the rest of the world is headed and has been heading for the past 2 decades. Do that, and then you get energy policy. I think we could really change the game for the country as a whole. And then all of a sudden the states could then decide how they want to compete. Because the federal government is such a large player in everything, it really does take them to help everyone else and bring everyone up.
I echo what Ryan says. I think everything that we've commented on so far are the key issues.
Okay. Greg, this one's for you. Access to credit continues to be a problem, the survey shows. Are loan requirements too strict?
Well, I think we're seeing some loosening in that area right now. A year ago, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, it was impossible to get credit for most things. Banks were reluctant to even look at loans. And now we're seeing some loosening in that area. I think it was probably healthy because the pendulum had swung from runaway credit availability and it probably swung too far the other way to denying credit. But I think now we're at a pretty happy medium. I see banks willing to loan. There's still some reluctance in certain markets. Real estate development would be an example. But even in that area, I'm seeing some relaxing of credit restraints.
Well, I've seen, some relaxation. If you move it from a business standpoint to an individual standpoint, I mean, it's still pretty difficult to get a home mortgage loan. Difficult's not the word. It's a challenge to go through the process is what I want to say. They did swing the pendulum. It was very difficult to get a loan. Now you can get a loan, but they just put you through the mill to get the loan. I had an individual, which was a relative of mine, my child, bought a house and put down more than 20%, a lot more than 20%. And the amount in what they put him through to get this loan was unreasonable. You can get a loan, but it was an unreasonable amount. From a business standpoint, I have seen, as Greg said, I have seen a little bit loosening up where they are, line of credit's a little bit easier to get. The real estate is still, a little bit dicey when you're going in. It depends on where the property's at, what kind of property it is, whether they're going to get it to you. But, depends on the bank, and again, depends on what area you're talking about.
Well, when the majority of loans are being dictated by FHA, that's what's going to cause it. When the private lenders will not come in the game yet to lend, you're going to have these struggles because you have one agency dictating loan terms. So everyone has to conform to these really high documentation levels, and they don't want to be sued like, the court case that just got announced yesterday for, misrepresenting the loan portfolio that they're packaging and selling. My thoughts are we need a deal maker in the administration that will go to Congress and compromise and make a deal and cut deals that help the entire country. We've had 14 years of close or either absolute control in the Congress and in the executive branch. Either both houses in Congress or one house and the executive office. And there's been really two very opposite polar ends. My thoughts are if you had someone that could come in and just make deals and not worry about their next cycle getting elected, we'd probably have some compromise. I always think of it from a business deal. If both parties are unhappy, it was probably a good deal. If one's happy and the other one's not, then someone didn't get a great deal, and vice versa. That's what I think we're missing right now. Everyone knows the issues this country needs to deal with. I mean, the debt one is huge, and it looks like that's what's kind of slowing things down because we got to deal with it. But there's other things that would, release the business community to go out there and really make some long-term investments. But you got to have a CEO that makes the deal and shakes hands and says we're going to do this because it's for the greater good of the company, or in this case, the country. Is not worried about, the board or not being there to when it comes time to campaign.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think there's one specific issue that's greater than the other, besides our debt. But it's a mentality. It's the personalities. It's just what blankets our U.S. Congress of this partisanship issues that covers everything. And Ryan, you've said it very well. We need someone who can cause that kind of change, not to use the word change related to the current administration, but someone who can cause that change. I don't know what it's going to be, but those partisan issues come up so severely in every single issue there is. It's almost disgusting. And when you hear other people, other commentators or journalists in other countries talking about our country and how we can't get along, how things can't get passed, and who's going to stonewall the other person, there just has to be I can't think of another word other than change in the culture of our Congress, no matter who's in that seat. And I think the rest of the issues are going to come up. They need to be dealt with. There needs to be consistency. There needs to be timeliness. There needs to be thought about the population, the Americans, and the businesses, and how it's going to affect everyone. And all the partisan issues have to go aside. I just don't see where much progress is going to be made, no matter who gets into office next. I, a little pessimistically think that it's still going to continue, because there's just a culture there that just isn't going away. And I really don't know how that change is going to come about, or what one person or CEO or a different type of background person. We've had different types of backgrounds and personalities in the White House, but the issues are still there. So I think that's the biggest issue for Congress, let alone the individual things about debt or immigration.
I'd add debt reduction to that. That's already been talked about. I mean, it's absolutely critical long term. I would add corporate tax policy. I think it's absolutely the wrong policy to try to write regulations or statutes to prevent tax inversions.
Mm-hmm.
We need to address the root problem. Is
Competition.
why are we having tax inversions? And that's very important. And we need to retain our businesses that have made this country great and keep them in the United States. So, I mean, those are my top two issues. And the other thing deals with kind of transparency and administration, but from a CPA's perspective, it is embarrassing that the federal government can't get a clean opinion on their audit.
Mm-hmm.
It's embarrassing that Congress has written legislation such that all the things that a commercial enterprise has to show on its balance sheet as a liability, pension obligations, the government exempts themselves from. And those are the things that need to be addressed, and we need to have some resolution in order for this country to remain a growth and powerful country, leading country in the world.
I would just add that, the report came out that, Greg's familiar with this report, Key Value Data. It's what we use in different business valuations, that the federal government probably had, a record year of revenues coming in right now, but they've also spent more than that. So, there you are. I think I was at the AICPA meeting, and we had the exact same question asked to us, and I said, well, if we could put 50 CPAs in their position, maybe we get this thing straightened out in a couple of years. So there's my answer.
Okay, Colette, last question. Are there any other pressing issues that will affect businesses in your area that we haven't touched upon?
That's a good question. In my area, no, I think we've touched upon the federal spending, the issues with Congress, being up in the Northern Virginia area and having so many federal contractors. Those are the main issues I tend to think about for the public accountants and CPAs that are up in that area. I think we've covered most of the major issues.
How about anyone else?
Just one area that we didn't cover a whole lot, and it's actually one of the reasons over and over and over that Virginia does employ a high quality of life is our education system. That is certainly the K through 12, but certainly at the institutional level of higher learning, our state universities, attracting more foreign students. And so when they have that experience, that 2-year, 1 year if it's in an MBA program or a graduate level program, or 2 years on an exchange program, or if they come here for a full 4 years, that experience they're not going to get in their home country. They're probably not going to get it in any other country at all. And if we can focus on growing that, most of these folks that come here pay out of state. So there's funds from an economic standpoint. And then you have folks that are probably pretty driven because they could probably go to the universities in their country, but they chose the U.S. And if we could embrace that and attract that, this whole thing of global trade and competing with the world, that would be like planting all the seeds around the globe that we need to plant. And so that's, my thoughts. There is a strategy that's going on. It will probably be announced in the first quarter of next year, specifically that targets that. But I would just say that that's something the state needs to not lose sight of.
Well, I know from my part of the country, it's usually within the top 10 of the best place to raise a child, educate them, the best healthcare system, and the best place to retire and live. So, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities out there. We just got to make sure we go about it right.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. It was very enlightening.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Peters, President and CEO of the Virginia Society of CPAs. Thanks for viewing our panel discussion on the 2015 Economic Expectations Survey. This survey is part of an annual partnership between the Virginia Society of CPAs and Virginia Business Magazine. I would like to thank our panelists today, Colette Wilson, Ryan Losi, Greg Lawson, and Charlie Equi, for sharing their expertise and insight on the survey. CPAs play a unique role in providing expertise and information about how the economy affects the business community. And surveys and forums like this are an excellent way to share this information with policymakers, the businesses in Virginia, and the public. Thanks for watching.